Now, what good golfers or good ball strikers will do is have more of the vertical hinge and the bend back part in that early transition phase than people who don't strike it as well, right? That's the key take-home part here. We want more vertical hinge, we want more bend back in transition and in early downswing. And if you see a slow motion of a good golfer compared to someone who doesn't strike it as well, you see that all the time, right, in the net result of what does this look like down here, right? This would be the not as good look. This would be the look we're going for. So how do we train this in and what are we looking for? I want to talk to you today about live view golf. Now you guys hear me say all the time that you need feedback when you're practicing. You need to know if you're actually doing what you're trying to do, and the best way to give yourself feedback ultimately is video. And not only is video the best way to give yourself feedback, but being able to see yourself simultaneously as you're doing a movement is the best form of video feedback. It's the best way I've seen to make changes in your swing and be able to correlate the differences between your feels and your reels. Live view is super easy to use and set up. Simply set it up behind or in front of you. You connect it with your iPad or phone, pop that on the ground. You can actually do your practice, see yourself as you're doing it, the best way to expedite your process. I encourage you guys to check out Live View Golf. We'll put a link in the description down below with a coupon code. Hey guys, Eric here, back out at the Bethlehem Golf Club. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to hinge the wrists during the downswing. Now really what we want to do in this video is first paint a picture so you can see a visual of how the wrists work. So we're going to hop over to Analyzer. I'll show you that. Now before we hop over, if you guys could, do us a favor, click that like button down below, click the notification bell and subscribe. Let's go ahead and take a look at how the wrists hinge during the downswing. We'll come back. I'll show you how to do it and what drills to use. Let's take a look at how to hinge the wrists during the downswing. Now in a previous video, we talked a little bit about how to hinge the wrist during the backswing. Let's just review some of the big picture pieces here, and then we'll dig into the downswing. And we'll look at it from both sides again so we can get a better three-dimensional idea of the actual hinge motion. And so we'll note on the right when Adam starts, and again, these numbers aren't going to be perfect. The point isn't for the numbers to be super specific, just to paint some general ideas here. And so let's look at the overall motion of the hinge, how much they hinge vertically, how much the wrist hinge back and forth, and we'll talk about that later. We see he starts at 140 degrees at address, and then we have him at just under 140, again with the lines not being perfect, during the takeaway motion. So during the backswing, we're going to note that he has very little hinge early on in the takeaway, and from this takeaway position, we'll start to add more hinge gradually to the top. And so if we pull this up here like this, we'll see that we'll get to roughly 90 degrees by the time he gets to left arm parallel. So it'd be from here. Again, from setup during the takeaway, very little hinge, gradually adding more hinge now to this position. And now as he gets up to the top of the swing, we'll see even more hinge, right? So he hinges more from there to the top, getting to, depending upon the lines here, we'll call it 70 to 75 degrees. There's about a 73 degree marker. So it's increasing hinge from the takeaway to the top is the majority of it. And now as we start to work back down, we'll see from here to the next position. This is where you have to look at both angles because the numbers aren't going to be 100% accurate because it's three-dimensional, but for the sake of visualization, we'll see that now during the downswing in orange, he's increased hinge. So from the top of his swing, he had 73 degrees, and then for about the first 2 feet down to left arm parallel, he's actually increased hinge. So from here to here, the hinge amount has increased. And that's a vertical hinging increase, but really a lot of the trail wrist bending more back. So, part of what we're going to see here, if we note the swing motions, is from the trail side, or the down the line, if we look at the angle of the shaft going back, part of that angle changing is because from this side, the shaft angle is getting slightly more horizontal or shallow. And so that is a bit of the motion that we're seeing changed. And that's a lot of the trail wrist extending or lead wrist flexing more. But again, for the sake of the numbers, we're going to look at it
to keep things simple, that there is a additional hinge during the downswing motion. So we had this 64 here. We'll get back to the top just to kind of re-reference this. And so at the top in red, we had a roughly 70 to 75 number. As he worked down into lead arm parallel, see as the shaft gets slightly shallower, the hinge increases. By the time we get to the next checkpoint, which is lead arm, we'll say lead club, club is roughly parallel to the ground again. Now we're down at 116. And so his hinge amount has almost cut in half from the top of the swing, right, into lead arm parallel into the club parallel. So from the top 76, he increased the hinge into lead arm parallel. This is where the increasing of hinge roughly stops. And then now that wrist angles are going to start to unhinge quite a bit, and you'll see that gradually happening from lead arm parallel to club parallel. So 64 degrees to 116 to the point where he gets to impact, where now we'll see the angle is going to be, let's see here, 154, 153 degrees. So a gradual unhinging motion from lead arm down to impact. So the kind of take-homes here are the hinging during the backswing is a gradual motion, both vertical hinge and the wrist hinging back, which we'll talk about. From the takeaway to the top is where a lot of the hinge is happening. The hinge is still increasing into the first 2 feet of the downswing to left arm parallel. And now that the wrists are unhinging quite a bit, and the shaft is getting forward really here, and a lot of this lag look we see is really, clear these out here, from that right wrist being bent back and the lead wrist being flexed. And so if we start to work into this pattern, now we'll start to see a lot of that hinge is coming from the trail wrist extension and the lead wrist being flat to bowed. And then again, it being fully unhinged in terms of the vertical component by impact, but still having shaft lean because of the angle of the trail wrist still being bent back and the lead arm and lead wrist being flat to bowed. So that's the general idea of how the hinging happens. Gradual increase during the backswing, increasing it more in transition, and then unhinging it later. Let's talk about how to do all this.
Okay, so there we got a picture of how the wrists hinge during the swing. Now what we want to talk about is, what do you do with this? How do you use that information? How should you hinge the wrists, and what drills to do? Now keep in mind when we're looking at that picture there and we're looking at some of the lines that are drawn, in terms of the wrist angles, we're talking about two main functions. So the wrists in the swing, right, are going to hinge up or down. So thumbs up, thumbs down. And they're going to hinge back and forth. So they hinge back and forth. Those are really the two motions we're looking at. Now, what good golfers or good ball strikers will do is have more of the vertical hinge and the bend back part in that early transition phase than people who don't strike it as well, right? That's the key take-home part here. We want more vertical hinge. We want more bend back in transition and in early downswing. And if you see a slow motion of a good golfer compared to someone who doesn't strike it as well, you see that all the time, right, in the net result of what does this look like down here, right? This would be the not as good look. This would be the look we're going for. So how do we train this in, and what are we looking for? Well, the best drill that I know how to do this is the hanger. And it's really a universal drill, and that's why I like to use it so much when we talk about the wrists, because it's the best thing that provides a feel. So a couple things I want to talk about. The hanger drill, put the hanger on the side of the club. The bottom of the hanger goes with the bottom of the grip. Feels a little weird when you grip it the first time. I'm going to make sure you get your normal left-hand grip with there on there. This part of the hanger touches my forearm, and the hook is above my forearm. Hanger's on the side, bottom, even with the bottom of the grip, touches my forearm, hook is above, right? So now, where this hook of the hanger goes is going to show me how much hinge I have. So if you note, the hook will go towards my forearm if I vertically hinge, and it'll go above my forearm if I unhinge. So we're going to keep that in mind from our face-on angle here in a minute. It also is going to press against my wrist if I bend it back, or I'm going to feel less pressure if I bend it forward. So I really have two key feedbacks here. I've got the hook for the hinge, and I've got the pressure of it when I pull it back or bend it forward. So what we're looking for here is to increase the hinge. We saw those numbers on there, right? Now, part of this is happening naturally. I'm not saying you consciously have to feel all this, but if you're someone who sees your angle throw too soon or any sort of this, you want to feel that you're exaggerating these pieces in a minute. So when we go up to the top, we said that there's not a lot of change here. We're about to 90 degrees. We were at about 75. Now from here to this part, it actually hinges more. And it hinges more in two different ways. One, where the hook is from face on. Here the hook's above my arm, right? That hook is gonna go down my arm more as I start my downswing, and it's gonna press into my arm more. So my right wrist when I start my downswing is gonna go thumb up and back. It's gonna hinge more vertically and back. My left hand when I come down is gonna go thumb up and back in the bow. Thumb up and back. So my wrists, when I start down, are going up and bent back, up and bent back. That's the motion I'm doing. And when I do that, as I start down, that's gonna be the piece that's gonna give me the lag look from face on. It's gonna shallow the downswing shaft and keep the face in order. So when you're practicing this, if you throw early, the first thing you wanna be aware of is the hook. And what we wanna feel is the hook stays above the arm going back and then rides down the arm in transition. The hook stays above the arm, going back, and then rides down the arm in transition. And I want to hit a few, just getting a sense of that. The hook stays above the arm, and then rides down as I start my downswing. And it's really happening in transition, right? Technically speaking, that's happening before you're ending your backswing, but you're getting this sort of feel with the club. So it's wider going back, stays above it. We saw not a lot of change to here. And now it's gradually working down my form as I'm shifting my pressure left and turning. So it stays above it going back, and then it's gonna gradually start to ride down my form. And the sensation is that that's happening in the late part of my backswing and early part of my downswing. That's how you would train the hinge piece in. So one more time for that part. Again, if you're someone who throws early, you wanna feel the hanger stand above the forearm and then work down the forearm. Above it and work down it, right? Stays above it going back and work down it coming through. And that's the piece you want to train in terms of the hinge motion. Now the second part to train in is how much it bends back. And we said not only do the wrists hinge vertically more in transition like we saw, just for the early phases, right? Then it's unhinging at the bottom. The wrists also bend back more. And so I would use the hanger for this as well. Put this on the side, but now this part, the feedback I'm gonna get when I get to the top is the hook and the hanger are pushing into my left forearm. Now if I bow my wrists more, which is what I want, I can feel that pushing into my arm even more. If I bend my right wrist back, I feel that pressing. I'm trying to break the hanger as I'm increasing the hinge. That's the part that's gonna give me all the lag and the shaft angle, et cetera, I want. And so really, the hook's going down my arm, stays above my arm. It's going down my arm as I'm pushing into it. So it's going down my arm as I'm bending my right wrist back, as I'm bowing my left wrist. I'm also adding the hinge component in the early phases of the downswing. We saw from about left arm parallel, then I'm gonna gradually let that unhinge to get to neutral. But if we're already throwing too early, you gotta really focus on creating that transition piece. So the hanger starts above, works down, and as it works down, my right wrist is gonna be more bent back as I start my downswing. And really what I wanna work on as I do this is record myself from face on, right? Use a live view so I can see myself simultaneously and see what the shaft's actually doing. What you wanna see, if we drew an angle between your arm and the club, that it'd be wider going back and slightly more narrow coming down. Part of that's because the body's shifting and turning, but what we're feeling is it's a little wider and a little more narrow coming down. So let's do that one more time. And depending upon what you're looking for, you can use the hanger for the hinge, the vertical hinge, or you can use it for the bend back piece, right? Either one of those. So the hanger is going to go above my arm and ride down it as my right wrist bends back. Above it, bend down it as my right wrist bends back. And again, that's the piece that's going to get me the lag in transition and then the shaft lean, right? The vertical hinge gets me the lag, and then the right wrist being bent back gives me the shaft lean. The vertical hinge gives me the lag, The right wrist being bent back gives me the shaft-line. So ultimately, we want to put those together, use a hanger drill. It's the best feedback tool I've ever used to be able to do this. Use a live view, use a video to confirm this. If you need to change the angle of the club and how your wrist hinge during the downswing, this should really help. As always, if you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Hey guys, thanks for watching today's video. If you did like the video, do us a favor, click the like button down below, click that little notification bell, and please subscribe. If you did like this and you do want to see more on how the wrist hinge, we're going to go ahead and put up 2 cards here on the screen for more YouTube videos. If you're interested in more personal coaching from me so I could be your personal golf coach, go ahead and click the Cogorno Golf logo on the screen. Hope you enjoyed the video.